Every night, without fail, something walks down our street whistling softly. You can only hear it if you're in the living room or the kitchen when it passes by, always starting at exactly 3:03. The sound begins faint, near the Carson place at the beginning of the lane. Our house sits towards the middle of the street, so the whistling moves past us before fading into the direction of the cul-de-sac. When I was younger, my sister and I would sneak into the kitchen some nights to listen. Mom and Dad didn't approve, and we'd catch hell if they found us out there. But they were never too harsh on us since we always stuck to the one big rule: don't try to look at whatever was whistling. Our neighborhood was peculiar. I've lived here since I was 6, and I adore it. The houses are quaint, yards well tended, and there are plenty of places to explore. Most of the kids my age grew up together. We'd play in the cul-de-sac or roam from porch to porch in the summer. It's a great place to grow up, I realize now. Yet there are only two strange things here: the nightly whistling and the uncanny streak of good luck. The whistling itself never bothered me much. I couldn't even hear it from my bedroom. But Mom and Dad don't discuss it, so I stopped asking questions. Dad is typically calm and collected, but whenever the topic of the whistler arises, he becomes tense, speaking faster and insisting we remember the big rule. Not that we could look even if we wanted to. Our windows are fitted with sturdy shutters on the inside, heavy pieces of canvas that roll down from the top and latch tightly at the bottom with small locks. Dad secures these shutters every night before we go to bed, keeping the key in his room. Mom, I'm not sure what she truly thinks about the whistling. I caught her out in the living room at 3:03 before. I could glimpse her through my slightly open door. She doesn't do it often, or maybe I haven't noticed, but occasionally, once or twice a month, I think she sits on our big red couch, just listening. The whistler always has the same tune every night. This is what I hear at nights. Apart from the nightly whistler, everyone in our neighborhood seems unusually fortunate. It's hard to explain, and Dad discourages us from discussing this part too, but good things happen frequently here. Usually small things like winning a radio contest, unexpected job promotions, or discovering authentic arrowheads buried in the yard. The weather is splendid, crime is non-existent, and everyone's gardens flourish magnificently in the fall. A million little blessings. Mom often calls it about living here, but the primary reason we stay, why we moved here initially, is my sister Nola. She was born very sick, something to do with her lungs. When she was born, we couldn't even bring her home, only visit her in the hospital. She was so tiny, I remember, smaller even compared to the other babies. A machine had to breathe for her. We moved into this house to be closer to the hospital. Immediately after, Nola began improving. The doctors couldn't explain it. They attributed it to their treatments, but we all could see they were baffled. But my parents knew, even I knew, Nola's recovery was just another of the million little blessings we received for living in our neighborhood. So we stayed, even after learning that for every small miracle that happens here every day, occasionally, some bad things happen. But they only occur if you look for the whistler. Our neighborhood has a welcoming committee. They arrive with macaroni casserole, a gift basket, and a manila folder whenever someone new moves in. They're very friendly. 4 people showed up when we moved in 7 years ago. The committee made small talk, gave me a Snickers bar, and took turns holding Nola. It was her first week home from the hospital, so they were extra cautious. Then the committee asked to speak to my parents privately, and I was sent to my room where I could still hear almost every word. They explained how nice the neighborhood was, exceptionally so, in ways hard to articulate. Then they told my parents about the even harder to explain whistling that occurred every night at 3:03, ending precisely at 3:05. They warned my parents that the whistling was harmless, would never hurt us, as long as we didn't try to look at what was making the sound. This part they emphasized, and I strained against the door to hear them. People who sought the whistler out had their luck change, sometimes tragically. A dark cloud hung over anyone who looked. Anything that could go wrong would. The manila envelope they brought contained newspaper clippings, stories of car crashes, ruined lives, public deaths, and freak accidents. Not everyone dies, the head of the committee told my dad, but the life goes out of them. Even if they live, there's no light in them ever again, no presence. My mom seemed to take it as a joke or a prank by the new neighbors. She accused them of trying to scare us out of our new home, even questioned if they were being discriminatory because of Dad's heritage. Dad calmed her down, explaining he'd heard such stories from his mom and knew there were strange things walking among us. Some were good, some bad, but most were just different. After the committee left, Dad went to the hardware store, bought the canvas blinds, latches, and locks, and installed them on every window in the house after dinner. That first night in our new home, I crept out of my room at 3 a.m., only to find Dad sitting on the living room couch, holding Nola. He motioned for me to sit beside him, quietly waiting. At precisely 3:03, the whistling began. It came and went exactly as our neighbors had described. The whistling returned each night, and we never looked outside. We enjoyed our million little blessings every day. Nola learned to breathe on her own and grew into a strong, clever girl. Dad even joined the welcoming committee. New neighbors were rare, but when they moved in, Dad and the committee brought them macaroni casserole, a gift basket, and the manila folder. I could always tell by Dad's expression when he returned if the family took the committee's warning seriously or if we'd be getting new neighbors again soon. Not long ago, a family moved in next to us, replacing Ms. Maddie, who had lived to be 105. Our new neighbors seemed like they would fit right in. They believed the welcoming committee, followed Dad's advice about the locked shutters since they had a young child too. Whatever evidence was in that manila envelope, whatever clippings, Dad never let us see. But I imagine it must have been compelling, as our neighbors lived without incident for the first month. One night, when our neighbors had to leave town, they sent their son, Holden, to stay with us. He was 12, a year younger than me. I didn't know him well before that night, but as soon as his parents dropped him off after dinner, I could tell it was going to be a bad time. "Do you know who's always out there whistling every night?" Holden asked the moment the adults left the room. The three of us were sitting in the den, some Disney movie playing idly on the television. My sister and I exchanged a glance. "We don't talk about that," I said firmly. Holden shrugged. "I think it's that weirdo who lives in the big yellow house on the corner." "Mr. Tolles?" Nola asked. "No way, he's really nice." Holden smirked. "Must be a psycho killer then." Nola tensed. "We don't talk about it," I repeated, my tone sharper than intended. "Let's go to my room and play Nintendo." We spent the next few hours playing games, eating popcorn, and watching movies, a typical sleepover. But I could sense Holden growing restless. After my parents wished us good night, locked the blinds, and retired to bed, Holden rose from his beanbag and walked over to where Nola and I sat on my bed. "Have you ever even tried looking?" he asked. "It's almost time." Like most sleepovers, we conveniently ignored any suggestion of bedtime. I was shocked to see that he was right. It was almost 3 a.m. I sighed. "We don't." "Look, I can't even try to look because my dad locks the blinds every night and hides the key," he continued, ignoring me. "So does our dad," Nola chimed in. "No," Holden retorted. "No, he doesn't." "You saw him do it," I said firmly, my patience waning. Holden grinned mischievously. "Your dad locks the blinds, yeah, but he doesn't hide the key. He keeps it right on his normal keychain." "So?" I asked warily, sensing where this was going. "So, after your dad locked up, but before your parents went to bed, I went to the bathroom. And on my way, I may have peeked into their room, and I may have seen your dad's keychain on his nightstand. And I may have taken the key off of it, just to see, you know?" Nola gasped. "You stole Dad's key." "Calm down," he said defensively. "I'm just saying, I could let you see if you wanted. We could all see. Maybe even take a picture. If we were careful. We don't know how to do it," I said firmly. "Not to mention, I'm not really sure we want to." Holden crossed his arms. "I bet it's not even that scary." You guys are just babies. We're not babies, Nola retorted. We just don't want bad things to happen. Bad things won't happen, Holden insisted. Besides, how will you ever know if you don't look? I exchanged a glance with Nola. She looked unsure, but I could tell she was considering it. Fine, I said finally, but only if you promise to put the key back right after. Holden grinned. Deal. We crept out of my room and into the hallway, down the stairs, and into the living room. Holden led us to my parents' bedroom. The key was right there, just as Holden said, sitting on my dad's nightstand. I felt the pain of guilt as Holden plucked it from the ring. He gestured for us to follow him back upstairs to the living room. Holden went up to the window nearest the couch and slowly began to raise the shutter. Nola and I watched nervously. The whistling outside continued, as it always did, unbroken. Once the shutter was open wide enough, Holden gestured us over. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. I peeked through the gap between the shutter and the window frame. At first, I didn't see anything. The night was dark, the street bathed in shadow, but then, just beyond the edge of our yard, I caught a glimpse of movement. There was someone out there, a figure dressed in all black. They were walking slowly down the street, their head tilted slightly to the side as they whistled that same tune. I couldn't make out their face, but there was something unsettling about their presence, something unnatural. It wasn't the sight of them that sent a shiver down my spine. It was the feeling that looking at them wasn't right, that something was deeply wrong about this act. Suddenly, the figure stopped whistling. They turned their head, their gaze fixing directly on our house. My heart skipped a beat. It was as though they could see us, see me, looking through that tiny gap in the shutter. Close it, I whispered urgently to Holden. Holden quickly dropped the shutter back into place, plunging us back into darkness. We stood there in silence, waiting. Outside, I heard the whistling resume. It seemed to grow fainter as the figure continued down the street, away from our house. We stood there for a few minutes longer, none of us saying a word. Finally, Holden broke the silence. "Did you see that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, unable to find my voice. "I told you it was nothing," Holden said with a nervous laugh. "Just some weirdo out for a late-night stroll." But his laughter sounded hollow, strained. "We should put the key back," Nola said quietly. Holden hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Silently, we returned to my parents' bedroom. Holden carefully replaced the key on my dad's nightstand. As we crept back upstairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. It was as though we had crossed some invisible line, stepped into a world we were never meant to see. The next morning, Holden's parents came to pick him up. He acted like nothing had happened, chatting cheerfully with my mom and dad. But I noticed how he kept glancing nervously at the window, as though afraid of what he might see. After they left, I asked my dad about the key. He frowned, then checked his nightstand. "It's right here," he said, relief evident in his voice. I didn't say anything else. I knew I should tell him what had happened, what we had done. But something held me back, a fear that speaking the words aloud would make them real. That night, as we sat down for dinner, I noticed something strange. The air seemed heavier, as though a storm was brewing just beyond the horizon. My parents exchanged worried glances, but they didn't say anything. After dinner, my mom sat down with Nola and me in the den. She didn't say anything at first, just sat there with her hands folded in her lap. "Do you remember what we talked about when we first moved here?" she asked finally. I nodded, my heart sinking. "We talked about the whistling," Nola said quietly. Mom nodded. "And what did we say about it?" "We said we wouldn't look," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Mom sighed. "That's right. We made a promise to each other and to ourselves. And we've kept that promise all these years." Nola glanced nervously at me, then back at Mom. "But what if someone else looked?" she asked quietly. Mom hesitated, then sighed. "I don't know, sweetie. I wish I did. But sometimes, when you look at something you're not supposed to, things change. Bad things happen. But we didn't mean to, I said quickly. Holden took the key, and we just wanted to see, that's all. Mom sighed again. I know, honey, but sometimes intentions aren't enough. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air seemed thicker now, as though a storm was gathering just beyond the horizon. I couldn't stop thinking about the figure outside, the way they had looked at me through that tiny gap in the shutter. It was as though they had seen something inside me, something I didn't even know was there. The whistling continued every night, just as it always had, but now, whenever I heard that familiar tune, I couldn't help but feel a chill run down my spine. Because now I knew the truth. There was something out there, something watching, waiting. And I had looked right at it.